Ankle injuries are a very common sporting injury. And once we've ruled out serious injury, things like a fracture, once we've worked out that it is an ankle sprain, the important thing to do in the acute phase, which is that first sort of 1 to 7 days, is to reduce the inflammation, reduce the swelling. We do this with the RICE method, so rest, ice, compression and elevation. The rest component is about modified rest, so it's resting from sport and activity, but it's not complete rest. So what we've found that continuing to move and continuing to weight bear through the ankle can actually help and speed up the healing process. Once we've gone through the acute phase, depending on where the ankle injury is, whether it be on the outside, the inside, or what we call a high ankle sprain, will determine where we go with our rehabilitation. Will also determine on when we aim to get back to sport. Lateral ankle sprains are the most common, and that's anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks normally to return to sport, whereas medial ankles, so inside of the ankle, or high ankle sprains typically will be a lot longer. So recurrence of ankle injuries is quite common amongst athletes, and so it's really important that we address the reasons of why they keep having these ankle injuries. So they are strength, but also proprioception deficits. So proprioception is the ability of the body to know what it's doing in space. So for example, when we step on a wobbly surface, we know our ankle wobbles and we can address that. The problem with after ankle injuries is we lose that sense. So it's really important, and this is why as physiotherapists we stress quite early on in rehab, is to get that proprioception back. And we do this with some basic exercises. So the rehabilitation exercises will change as we move through the process. So in stage 1, we'll address strength and balance and proprioception. So some basic exercises we'd look at would be a calf raise. So normally we'd start that either on flat ground, or if people can manage, we'd do it onto a step. And the other exercises we'd start with would be practicing standing on one leg, if people can tolerate. Then what we'd do is we'd progress on to stage 2. And so for that we'd move more onto landing practice. So we'd do that slow and controlled. So this can be things like stepping off and onto a step, or also just some changing directions, walking, so we can do some sideways stepping as well. And the other thing we would do is we'd move that calf raising that we did in stage 1 onto a hop into the stage 2. When we move to stage 3, it'd be more sport specific. So depending on what people do, we'd really tailor where we go with the exercises. But some examples would be some landing practice more onto a mat, so on and off of steps onto an uneven surface, and things like on and off of boxes and steps, and then taking off, changing directions, getting the person back ready for sport.